everybody. Welcome back to the Vertigo Table. I am Ryan Doyle, and joining me today, I am very happy to have Mark Seifter. Mark, welcome to the program. Thank you for sharing your time with me. You are a very busy man. You got a lot of things going on. Tell the folks at home where they might find you and what you're up to.
So I'm on a lot of places as just Mark Seifter, such as Blue Sky and X. I'm also on the channel Arcane Mark on YouTube, along with Linda Zayas Palmer, my wife, and I show up pretty much every week on Roll for Combat Live, which is Stephen Glicker's channel on YouTube. I suppose Roll for Combat is the YouTube channel, and Roll for Combat Live is one of the features that is on that channel. So those are usually the easiest places to find me, other than that you can go into Discord and join either the Roll for Combat Discord or the Arcane Mark Discord. And I hang out on the Arcane Mark Discord and pretty much read everything there. The Roll for Combat one is too big to do that, but I do at least hang around the ones about the books I'm working on and check those out.
Awesome. So speaking books you're working on, I mean, we should say Battle Zoo. Um,
So yes, the Battle Zoo line of books for Roll for Combat. I am currently the director of game design there. Prior to that, I worked at Paizo for almost a decade as a game designer and then as the design manager for the game design team at Paizo. So that is basically that's what I do. I design games. I'm kind of known as like the I guess the rules expert slash math guy, but I have a big interest in a wide variety of pretty much every piece of designing games, from like the story rich stuff down to, yes, the math, which I've been, sometimes typecast as, but it is something that I do.
Yeah, and I mean, and you did a great job. So if you're looking for Mark, he might be behind you on your shelf too, because in in the front material of Pathfinder 2, you're gonna find Mark's name right at the top. And you did, I mean, it's a great game. I think it draws a lot of people in because the math is so tight, especially coming from, let's say, other systems. Um, the encounter balance is beautiful. The character balance is beautiful. Like it's so great. But I really like listening to you talk, especially on Roll for Combat, where you guys tackle like what's in the news as much as anything else. I mean, you go deeper than that too, but you bring a very broad perspective. You're not just onto the rules side of things. You're focused on like the narrative player fantasy side of things, and you're also in the business and have been for a long time. So you have a broader perspective on especially some of these like hot take push button issues that pop off.
I would say
Um,
Steven may have the hotter take on it, and I'm usually the one who's like, "Hold on, let's look at this from every angle. There may be more to it than that. We have to think about things from the perspective of everyone who's acting in this story, and not just from our own immediate reaction to it."
yes, and I appreciate that. If the YouTube algorithm doesn't, because it wants instant energy and emotion and response, like you take a very balanced approach to things and like zoom in. I mean, I like what Steven brings to the table. I mean, he's a fellow New Yorker. I like his style. I appreciate where, and I mean, he also has a vast wealth of, you know, knowledge and
You guys are
experience.
both New York and Pittsburgh, huh? Because
Uh,
Steven went to school in Pittsburgh.
oh, I didn't know that.
So he's those are like the two areas that are very important to him.
Oh, that's funny. I wanted to meet him in Pittsburgh at PGX at the convention here, but he couldn't JFK, or I don't know if it was JFK or LaGuardia, but he had airport issues, which as a New Yorker, I was like, oh shit, okay. Well, maybe next year I'll see him.
Yeah, it's funny you say about the YouTube algorithm. I've had some people who called me. They were like, "Mark is kind of like the anti YouTube algorithm. Everything he does is gonna make his content like fail on the YouTube algorithm, because like the Arcane Mark channel like doesn't have hot takes, and we just want to like discuss things from every perspective and just kind of be positive instead of being like, oh my gosh, are your RPG books going to come to life at night and kill you? Oh, but click on this link to find out." And so like we've been going, Linda and I, for 5 years, and haven't really gotten very many views during a lot of that time. Although we've managed to pick up some after Kraken Week. I think the algorithm figured out who wants to be seeing that kind of
Mm,
like sort
mm.
of more positive and less hot takey content. And I think it just took it a few years of trying and failing to send it to people. But after Kraken Week, it was like, oh, this is who I can send it to, who will want to watch it, and it worked out.
Yeah, it's about finding your audience because like I'm your audience. I am not interested in the latest, greatest, worst thing that happened this week and how everything's on fire. Like there's enough of that in the real world. I want yeah, I want fun. And I like the broad perspective and the options. You guys aren't coming in as like the one true way, which is actually interesting because the two of you, you and Linda, like maybe know better than a lot of internet commentators who I don't know, didn't write the game that they're talking about. So yeah, I
Well,
appreciate
here's
it.
the thing. Here's the thing that I think. And you can see this even when I like interview some people on Roll for Combat Live. We had on like Nathan Barling, who's a paleontologist, and we had on at one point Hannah from Feylet Wild Fiend, who like had a degree in some of these like medieval fairy tale things.
Mhm.
And the more that someone is actually an expert in something, the more that when you say that they're an expert in something on the stream, and this happened in both of those streams, that they'll push back and be like, "Well," Nathan was like, "Well, you should know that my field of expertise in paleontology is very specifically towards this particular sediment analysis, which is not exactly the same as the dinosaur we're talking about here." And so generally I find that on average the less informed someone is, like if they're like very smart and have good analytical skills but maybe are not deeply into the topic, they're more likely to just be like, yes, I'm an expert on everything in this topic. Whereas the more that they are a legitimate expert, the more they're going to demur and be like, well, this isn't quite my field. I sometimes tell a story of when I was starting out at Paizo, people were like, air elementals. They tell you how tall the spout is, but how big is it? What's the volume of it? Because you need to know how many creatures could fit and how many spaces it takes up on the battlefield. Can anybody tell me, Mark? Can you tell me? And so I asked my group, which included at the time, I think, three MIT physics PhD candidates. I was like, okay, guys, let me know, okay? What's the deal with this? And they're like, Mark, fluid dynamics is not our specialty of physics. You know, all three of us are working in quantum physics. This is not quantum physics. We don't have any idea how to calculate that question. So, like, this is just how the world works once you get to a certain point.
Yeah, and it's wild because like I could have answered that in like ninth grade or 10th grade. Like I used to know how to calculate like I think that's the volume of a cone. I mean, it's not a perfect cone, but that'll like approximate it. But like haven't used that in 20 years and now that's gone.
Oh, we could
Um,
have given them the cone, but the person
okay.
was like, I'm not sure it's exactly a cone if you just have the height of the spout when you're looking at the way that an actual whirlwind works. And I was like, whoa, I'll ask my physics players. And
I'm
they
not
were
a
like,
meteorologist.
yes, darn it, Jim, I'm a quantum physicist, not a meteorologist.
All right, so first question, Quantum Ogres, what's your stance? No, but speaking of, let's go into D20 questions because I'm very interested. We might use all of them, but I'm gonna ask you to roll a D20. And that's
Okay.
gonna determine the card. There's no bad or good. But yeah, roll some dice and
Oh
tell me what
man.
you get.
I was doing an interview combat with Linda where there was bad or good, and we got a +5 bonus for our 5 years on YouTube, and we wound up winning all but one of the questions, and they
Oh, is
almost ran
that
out of
Jim? Wizards and Word
yeah, with
Slingers?
Wizards and Word Slingers. So Jim almost ran out of the easier questions because we just kept nailing the
He
D20s.
ran
All
out of
right.
the bad ones with me.
Oh
I
no!
could
Oh
not I could
no!
not roll I could not roll above like I think I rolled above a 10 one time.
Linda and I
Uh,
never lost to him, but eventually he was out of the good ones and we tied. So we were like, we'll just give you this one.
yeah. So I'm a little less combative than GM Jim.
All right,
Friend of
so
the channel. What'd you get?
I mean I liked his interview. It wasn't combative at all because we had
No.
all the easy questions.
No,
I got a
it's
7.
you got a 7. I will also so the combative part, I guess maybe. If you roll doubles here, it's the lightning round. Ooh.
Ooh.
Um,
If I roll doubles, does that mean if I get a 7
if
again
you get
next
if
time,
you
then
yeah if you get a repeat.
okay.
Um, Other sources of inspiration for TTRPGs. So not the vast knowledge of games that you have, but like other places that you're pulling on when you're getting creative with games.
So I pull from just everything. Did I like read a book, watch a movie, see a TV show that's interesting? If there's something that interests me just aesthetically or from like the appearance of it, or just like, oh yeah, that special move looked cool. Let's do that. Or, I liked how this game like focuses on like the high and the low tides of water. So for example, it's fair to say that while the water element in Battle Zoo Eldabon, which is like a new magic system that has 13 elements, each with a different play style that you can use instead of slotted spellcasting in 5e or PF2 with your elemental avatar or with like little Eldamon monsters that use the powers that you like befriend and team up. So it's fair to say that like some of my like inspiration, even though the mechanics are completely different for the water element, was just that like I really like the aesthetic in Spirit Island of Ocean's Hungry Grasp, one of the starting spirits who is always like, it's high tide now, I'm going to surge out onto the field into a bunch of areas. It's low tide and I have to pull back, and now I can influence fewer places. And so like the way that that sort of rhythm goes, and
Mhm.
so the water element in Battle to Eldamon also alternates between high tide and low tide. In high tide, your powers often have each water power has an added stronger, usually offensive effect, and it pushes the enemies. But there's a drawback. You're letting your guard down. You're pushing your tides away. You often like lose armor class, or you are also knocked up off balance by the water or something else like that. Whereas in low tide, you bring the water back to protect you. It pulls enemies towards you. It does not have the extra offensive benefit, but it often like raises your defenses or does some kind of utility benefit for you. And so you are forced to do high then low, and alternate between your powers. So you have to find a really clever way to combine them. And
Mm.
it pulls things towards you when you're the most defended and pushes them away when you're the least defended. So there's a rhythm you can go about it. So that's like one example. I do this like a lot where like it's nothing like what actually happened in Spirit Island, but like I was inspired by the idea that that water could be focused on tides and not just like the sort of stereotypical, oh, the water is the healer or something.
Mhm. Yeah, I like that a lot. And those are my favorite kind of mechanics where it's like risk reward, cost and balance, where like as a player, I am making decisions. It's not just like this is the best button to push every time. There's more strategy and tactics to it. And it's almost like, in a situation like that, you're almost playing two characters and you're like balancing between them. Yeah, that's fascinating. Awesome stuff. Everyone go check out Battles. I said it already, but beautiful stuff coming out of that shop. All right, good. No notes. Roll a
All right,
d20.
shall I
Give me.
roll again?
Yeah, hit me.
All right, let's see what happens this time. It's a 2.
Two. Okay. So a lot of these are geared towards like game mastering, but I will accept game design takes as well.
Sure.
What is your least favorite aspect of running games or perhaps designing games?
So my least favorite aspect of running games, I would say, is probably when you have to get into that really long portion of random bookkeeping. So, for instance, I really loved Pathfinder First Edition so much that I dropped out of my PhD at MIT to come work for Paizo during Pathfinder First Edition. Like it was pretty much one of my favorite games of all time. I say this with love, but my Pathfinder First Edition group, when they were getting into a really big fight, like let's say the final encounter of an adventure path, that there it would literally we spent a 4 to 5 hour session where the only thing that they did was casting their pre-buff spells
Mm,
for the next session
mm,
and buying consumable items that they then used for that session. And that was probably like one of my least favorite things, even though everyone always talks about the encounter we had after that, which I also spent like over 12 hours preparing and modifying from the original adventure path. So like it led to something great, but it was I would say like a necessary cost for that great encounter, but like one that really was a cost. It was not something that I think anybody actively was like, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, let's do a session where we cast all of our buff spells. So I would say it was that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe that person's out there. And then I mean, there's the medicines and the dosage, right? There's like the right amount of that, which I think second edition does a much better job of like reining in all those little modifiers. Um,
I think one thing when we designed second edition, one thing that I was very much going into was to try to lean off of the idea of like the clockwork party that has 50 buff spells and then just tries to run through rooms that you should be spending a few minutes searching and be like, well, with these 10 minutes of buffs, I can get through 70 encounters if I really rush through them, and do that with a carrot instead of a stick.
mm,
By which I mean, well, look at these beautiful things you could do if you wait and stop 10 minutes and take some time. And maybe one character is reading the runes on the wall that you probably should have been reading anyway, but the other people are getting free healing or getting their focus point back or something like that. So creating things that you wanted to do for 10 minutes to be a counter pull. So because in Pathfinder 1, there wasn't anything like that, more or less. So of course, if you could convince your GM that your characters were robots who never needed a drink of water or to even stop to breathe, I've had a player who was just like, I've counted every round that we did in combat and how far the distance was to fighting. We were sprinting like in combat into each room. And I think my 3 minute spell is still going to be up for a sixth encounter or whatever it is. But because there's no reason not to try to do that if your GM will let you do that and
mhm.
not be like, come on, guys, there's some time that is being taken in between these to take a breather. But in Pathfinder 2, there is a game incentive, even for someone who's optimizing or trying to do the strongest thing, to take that break.
Yeah, and that's not a specific. I mean, that happens in Pathfinder 2e or 1e too for like frequently, but like that's not specific to Pathfinder. Like I've seen that in 5e, I've seen that in other games where like I have 10 minutes. That fight was 18 seconds because time. So like I run blindly into the next room, look around. If there's no one there to kill, I run through that room to the next room, and like now we're speed running a TTRPG and like leaving so much of the good stuff, like exploration, maybe potentially social interactions, because like you're a walking AOE spell. You walk into a social encounter because you wanted to max out your damage, and like, okay, now this person's no longer interested in talking to you. Yeah,
I've
so there's ways
definitely
around
had
that, but
situations where there was a negotiation that started, and then one of the players is like, "Our buff spells are running off. So do you give in right now, or are we going to attack you? Because otherwise, you're just pretending to negotiate to make us lose our spells."
right. Yeah, so I think I mean, I think you're referring to the dungeon turn in second edition, like kind of disincentivizing that to a
But
degree,
that
or
and just like the many beneficial things that explicitly take 10 minutes, while very few buffs will last past that. So it's like once you've decided you're going to treat wounds or refocus,
yes.
that's it for like 90% of the buffs. And any buff that would survive that duration probably is going to be fine, like for the whole dungeon anyway. And so you didn't need to rush.
Yeah. Yeah, I will like, and it's a little, maybe it's gamist, but like in those situations, I have, and I don't do it as a rule, but like I have been like 10 minutes a room. What do you do? What are you doing in this room? It takes 10 minutes, and I like go around the table, let everybody go. Because I've let people speed run, like literally speed run stuff, and then it's wait, what are we doing? Why are we here? It's like, well, it's 8 rooms back. You could have read the writing on the wall, literally. Um,
Yeah, sometimes it's appropriate. Don't get me
yeah.
wrong. If anyone wants to watch on Arcane Mark, one of our currently most popular videos is I ran for 5 D&D YouTubers, 3 of which had never run Pathfinder 2, and I did not explain the rules to them.
Mm,
Pathfinder Second Edition, and we got to a little mini dungeon, and they did not want to let the enemies know that they were attacking and sort of isolating smaller, easier to defeat groups. They managed to not get most of the encounters to combine, but the way they did that was that they rushed around, and that was reasonable in the fiction. Whereas in some of these dungeons where it's obvious that nothing else is going to attack you right now,
mhm.
that's the ones where you might have been able to take your time otherwise.
Yeah, and that was great. That was I mean, Anto is a big Pathfinder 2e guy, but you
Yeah, he's
had
one of the two who had played
yeah,
before. The ones who played before, I believe, were like Matt and Anto, and
yeah,
Anto have done it quite a bit.
yeah, and then you had Stephanie and Sean,
Hmm. And
um,
Riker.
Riker. Yes, 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 yes. Good. Check it out. That was Kraken Week too, actually, right? That was a
That was
Kraken Week
also Kraken Week.
themed game. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I can't believe we actually got 6 different people to find a time slot that we could reach within 1 week and ran it and got it out there. That was a marvel of collaboration to me.
It Kraken, yeah, we're gonna do that every year, I hope. Because like that was shout
Me
out
too.
to Jenny D and Antonio from Pointy Hat for like making a TTRPG holiday festival celebration out of thin air. Good job.
Danny D and Antonio are legends
Yeah,
for running all of that.
incredible. Incredible. Yeah, I wanted to join your game, but I was away. I was bummed. I was literally in a tent in the woods somewhere.
Well, maybe we'll do a follow up because
Yeah,
people on the Arcane Mark channel liked that more than anything we had ever done up until that point. Although
interesting.
yesterday we did something else that got more views, but a lot less view time because it was 7 minutes instead of 2.5 hours.
That's the trade-off. Yeah, that's what this is gonna be. Sorry. Or no, the opposite. But what was that? What was yesterday's?
I put out a video that was just sort of with Linda, like explaining something that people had been like quoting me from an AMA correctly and in context for the most part, but they had to be like with ellipses quoting certain things in an AMA for a topic that often comes up. And so Linda and I wanted to give like a 7 minute, like full description of what this was that people have been quoting with more context and how to use that information about the idea of not letting the existence of a feat or the possible existence of a feat if you don't know all the feats in advance like make it so that if you're a new GM that you're worried about improvising or you're like afraid that these feats are landmines that are going to block your way, and variety of ways to approach that so that it will work out with the feats whether you know them or not, and that you can handle it with your group.
Cool. I'm watching that when we hang up because that was an experience that I had running Pathfinder. Not right away, but like at later levels. It's funny actually as I got to know the system better and better and better, I found myself at least struggling not to say no to a lot of creative player ideas because I'm like, well, this person specced into that and made decisions on their decision tree to be good at that. So if I just let you do that for free, I'm actually taking away from what their character build decisions were.
Right. You
Um,
definitely to spoil it in a TLDR is just like usually the improvised version is not going to be as efficient or powerful as the one from the feat. And if your group thinks that you're going to improvise and it's like anybody should be able to do it like this, and that doesn't seem overpowered, even if they wanted to do it every turn for all of their actions and not just in this one situation, then in that case you might consider removing the feat or even making the feat stronger if that's what you think works for your group. But in many cases, there's an easier way to handle it. For example, if you want to coerce a giant group of people without group coercion, you can do it, but it might take longer, like the amount of time for more people, or more likely have a higher DC. Because if I can get you alone in a room and I like push you back against the wall and start like shouting intimidating things in your ear, that's a lot scarier than if you've got like 50 buddies and I try to do that, right? It's probably there's safety
mm-hmm,
in numbers. So
mm-hmm,
you
mm-hmm.
could raise the DC, whereas people who have the feet they wouldn't raise the DC. It's as easy for them to intimidate a group of 50 people as it is for them to intimidate one person alone in a dark alley.
That's a great answer. That's the perfect answer, actually. Of like,
I
this feed
guess that's
doesn't
why
let you
that's our
do a
number
thing.
one video now.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. I can understand why. Because yeah, it's not this feed doesn't allow you to do the thing. It just you're good at it because you have trained in this or you have some innate ability. That makes perfect sense. Yeah, I like that a
Yeah.
lot, actually.
Another example that didn't come up in the video, but in some of the comments people were asking is there's like a feat that lets a barbarian just like throw their ally and the ally gets an attack. It's like a fastball special,
Hmm,
right?
hmm.
And in my game on Saturday night, they tried to do something like that without the feat, and that's fine. I allowed it, but I used the basic rules of the game. So there was a tiny slime swashbuckler, and the swashbuckler gained panache, and then readied in action to attack when he was near the flying monster.
Mm-hmm.
That was took him 2 actions to ready and his reaction to attack. Then another person picked him up and tossed him so that he would get within 5 feet. So it took a total of 4 actions and a reaction to do this, and
Mm-hmm.
then he took it down. Right. But if the barbarian had that feat, it would have only just taken the barbarian 2 actions and the one person a reaction. So it would have been way more efficient to have the barbarian feat than it was to do it like kind of the a la carte way. And so that's sort of where I go. I'm a very improv heavy GM, even though people might not expect it, since I am one of the designers of a fairly rules heavy system. And I like how having strong rules framework allows me to improv really wildly, but in a way that then winds up feeling consistent and fair.
Because that's why I like crunch. I like there's an answer in this book, and we can find it. And we don't have to agree with it or use it, but it's there if we need it. Um, yeah, because balance, I'm always less concerned about like the balance in the encounter, the balance between the monster side and the player side. You can adjust on the fly. There's a lot of tools in your toolbox that you can adjust that in preparation or while you're cooking at the table. It's very difficult to balance things between the player
Hmm.
characters, if the system hasn't done that for you without really putting your thumb on the scale or like nerfing somebody. Like none of those answers feel good, and are hard to understand the ramifications of. So yeah, about and like oof, swashbuckler, man, love, great class. love love a little panache in my life. um yeah, and that was my favorite part of that system is like, ooh, there's so many choices here and none of them are bad. There's no traps. There's like powerful synergies or whatever. But yeah, great stuff. Roll a d20. Let's get
I
another one on
did,
here.
and unfortunately for me, it was a 7. So I'm
Nice.
stuck in the lightning round.
I manifested that. You can go as long as you want. There is no timer. There's no pressure here. But do you fudge?
No, but like you mentioned, there's a variety of tools that you have to deal with or adjust the difficulty. What I do is if I'm really between two things, I'm like, ooh, gosh, looking at where this person is, it probably take them 1 or 2 rounds to like get into this encounter and add on like the distance. It's definitely at least 1 round, but I don't know if they like had their where they were standing in the room that they were. They may have had to move over to where their weapon was to pick it up or to the door. And if I'm in the middle of deciding, but then I'm like, well, it'd be more fun if it took 2 rounds though, because they're having more trouble right now. If this guy opens the door in 1 round, it could be a little bit much. Maybe I'll tip the scale onto 2 if I'm deciding between those two things.
Mhm.
So there's dozens of ways that you can adjust the levers like that or make judgment calls. And so there's no need for me to fudge and sort of possibly lose my players' trust by doing that,
Mm.
because I can generally always get things to be exciting, but like not go to a terrible outcome by virtue of just tweaking things that are not like fudging or changing the results to what they hadn't been.
Yeah, I'm in that camp. I've only just started using a dungeon master screen because I'm doing a much more like random encountery hex crawly system, so I need you to not see my book. But for the 2 years prior to that, I've been rolling in the open. Just like what the dice say is what happens every time. And then it kind of takes a little responsibility away from you too. Like the dice are a third party oracular. This is what the dice say. Don't look at me because you sucked a crit. Sorry, I didn't do that. It happened. The monster did that. Speaking of dice, what is your favorite die size?
Well, usually I like the standard die size, but that's just what I'm used to. Linda likes some of the small ones because they're cute, but they're a little bit hard to read for me.
It's I gotta
Um,
reframe this because I've had this answer a couple times. The what like denomination, like D4, D6, D8, not like, I like a big chunky D20 or like the tiny like baby Keith one,
oh,
but like
okay.
what
I was also gonna say the big gigantic ones are sometimes fun as a novelty,
yes,
but
yes.
okay, okay. In terms of die denomination, I think my favorite is the D100.
Oh,
It's my favorite denomination because it encourages me to get creative and fill out some kind of a table with 100 different things in a way that none of the other die sizes quite can get the juices flowing. So that's why I think it's my favorite. But I like them all for different reasons.
That's a good
Except the
answer though.
D4 because it hurts my foot when I step on it.
My buddy just had this like I don't even know like rounded D4, and I can't decide if I like it or not, but I'm like really open to liking it because I
Oh,
yeah
like those crystal ones that the two ends are impossible to land on, and so you have to land on one of the four longer sides.
oh no, I've seen those too though. Yeah. Those are cool. Yeah, we need to fix the D4. I don't know.
But it is the stately tetrahedron.
Well, okay, so follow-up question.
Okay.
Corollary, D100, do you like the big like I'm a golf ball practically, or do you do like the two D10s with the
I do the 2d10s. That big one, there's sort of like a excitement aspect of it, but I've never found that it's easy to read or roll. And for me, that is more important than whether I get excited that it has that many sides on it. It has to be one that I can quickly do it because I might be rolling like a bunch of
Mhm.
D100 tables in a row. Like, let's say that I'm using the like complex deep Eldamon creation rules because on Saturday, Linda's Eldamon trainer found two Eldamon in the session because they went to like a tower that was built on like ley lines and they found like a geomantic earth gopher Eldamon that was in there, and they also found like with one of the fey creatures that was in there was being inhabited by a little pumpkin wood Eldamon. And so I wanted to use the complex tables, so I rolled like six D100 tables for each one of those to figure out like I think one of them, I think the pumpkin was like a little bit young and so only spoke the language of wood spirits and not common,
Mm.
whereas the gopher was kind of more ancient and had just been there for a while since the towers were built, and there were just other things like that. But if I had the golf ball, it would have actually taken me like 10 minutes to roll it that many times and have it stop and then try to read it probably, and given how many times I was rolling it, the other players would have gotten slowed down.
Yeah, it can take like 2 minutes for it to like stop rolling, and then you're like, I'm not really sure if this is 97 or 98, and now I'm basically fudging. So, um, ooh, I don't even know if this question applies to you. It's a very interesting published or homebrew. I feel like that
Okay.
distinction breaks down for you.
Publish or homebrew, what does the question like mean?
Adventures. Do you run published
Oh, do I
adventures or
run
home?
published or homebrew adventures? Okay,
Yes.
so when I started, I ran like 100% homebrew
Mhm.
adventures. But as I got to a stage in my life where I didn't have as much time, I also started using a lot of published adventures as well. And now it kind of depends on the game system, but in Pathfinder 2, I mostly run published adventures.
Well, that's oof, yeah. We didn't really talk about Paizo's adventure paths, but that's yeah, good good stuff.
I've been
Um,
running Jewel of the Indigo Isles from Roll for Combat, and just because it fits with some of the stuff that I'm working on very, very well. And it's super easy to run when I don't have time to prep because it has more details included in it. Because Steven did not have a page count limit. Instead, he just kept upping the page count. And so it wound up with a lot of extra content that makes it a little quicker and easier for me to run, at least.
God, that's such a polarizing thing. I saw who are you talking to? You guys were talking to Baron DeRop, and Baron seemed to have very OSR, like give me the simplest, most quick usable thing at the table. Um, and you were right down the middle and seeing
Yeah,
all
I
of
mean, I
the
like that
all,
too,
all of the angles.
but
I enjoy
yeah,
I see the appeal to that, but I think Steven was more like give if I am paying you money for hundreds of pages, give me all the stuff and I won't use it if I don't need it.
right.
Um and yeah, I
It,
I see both perspectives there, really.
I'm always the middle guy, and on that where like but sometimes we don't have someone who handles the other extreme, so as the middle guy, I have to be the one who covers it. But it was nice to have Baron's perspective, which is very valid, Steven's perspective, which is very valid, and me being like, well, you know what? Like those are both very correct depending on the different styles of GMing.
Right. It's all preference. So much of this stuff comes down to like where no one's arguing like you're wrong because of what you ordered at the diner last night. But it's like, no, there's one true way to have breakfast, and like French toast is for suckers, and like you need to be making pancakes right now. But in
Hmm.
TTR, in like nerd culture, people plant flags on hills and try to die on them. Not that you guys were doing that that time, but how about encumbrance? What are your thoughts on encumbrance?
So, what I generally feel is that encumbrance using weight is like it's a good idea from a simulationist perspective, but it doesn't do enough to convince people to actually use it.
Mm,
What you
well said.
want most out of an encumbrance system in a game is that people can use it and that it makes a difference and it matters.
Hmm.
So, if you want to give an example of a game where the encumbrance really matters, how about Ben Milton's Knave?
Mm,
Every single thing that your character does is using actually an encumbrance slot. And the damage you take before it goes to your true hit points and starts killing you is actually knocking off some of those slots. So you want to cast spells? Great. You've got like one of your slots is filled with like the tome slash writings that is for that particular spell. And so each day you can use it. And the more spells you have, the more you're encumbered with those. And so like that's a great example of a system that uses its encumbrance in a way that is very clear to the players what you're doing. It may not be realistic that each of these things takes the same amount of your encumbrance, but it's easy to remember and use. And if players buy into it, they're not going to try to claim, oh, yeah, well, I can just have three more spells because I stuck them on my hat. It's like, no, the game is balanced around this being the limit of how much you can hold. And weight is kind of the unfortunately, even though it's a real world realistic way to do things, it is like the worst of all directions in terms of people actually using it, in terms of it mattering, because you can usually just stay under it unless you have very low strength. And so I think that like bulk in Pathfinder 2 is that like a good compromise
mhm.
between a system that is entirely with the encumbrance being like a key feature versus the weight that nobody's going to use. It's just easy enough that people are more likely to use it. It does have its pros and cons, though. It's not a perfect system by any means.
Yeah, it's again, there's no one size solution for everybody, but like I do like a slot based, and in something like Knave, where it's like your stuff is defining your is a stand-in for your class. Like you're not a wizard, you brought three spell books along, so you have three spells to cast. Um, yeah, and you ding your strength, and now oops, you can carry less things now. Like it's
Hmm.
almost yeah,
And that really matters.
that
That
really
really makes you
matters.
feel like the carrying capacity stat is really important as opposed to just like, well, it's fine, whatever. I just make sure I'm not carrying a heavy thing and it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
really matters
it
in
puts it to
Nave.
the core of the game and the character and the gameplay. Yeah. Favorite class.
Mm.
Tough
Well, I have too many classes that I like, so I just have a routine answer for this, which is generally true. When I get into designing a class, then I get really into that class. I have to fall in love with the class that I'm currently designing, even if it's not usually my number one fantasy. And I'm like, this is the best class idea that I've ever gotten to do ever, because not every class can be that for me. And so basically, I fall in love with the class I'm writing. And so the most recent classes that I worked on were the Eldamon Trainer and the Elemental Avatar. So for now, it's going to be them. But the next time I write a class, I'm going to fall in love with that one. And then that's going to be my favorite class. So,
yeah,
the one before that was the Thaumaturge.
which is a good one. Yeah, that's a very good answer, man. Love the one you're with, right? So I guess perhaps the same. Well, actually, you might have to say Leshy. So let's assume Leshy's the first answer for reasons. What is your favorite lineage, ancestry, species?
Well, there's a lot that are really fun. I kind of like the dragon ancestry, just because it's like so big. It's got like this gigantic over 100-page book that is like just one ancestry. So that's like something no other ancestry will ever probably do or would be conscionable to do for an ancestry. But the dungeon ancestry is also kind of cool just because it's fun to play as a dungeon
Mm.
as your character and be like, yes, I'm an avatar of a dungeon. We can all go into the dungeon and do like a special side mission where we reveal more about like the inner depths of myself and learn more about these mysteries.
Yeah, you guys did that. That was such like a fun, like meta commentary. Like that was so, it's the right amount of like smart and dumb. It's like perfect for like, I loved that concept. Yeah, there's Battle Zoo is not just Adventures of the Monsters, like awesome character choices coming out of there. Because like how many there's like how many sub ancestries? My language is failing me, but like in that dragon book, there's like
Oh, how many
Fae,
heritages?
yeah, heritage. Thank you.
45.
Yes, yeah, yeah,
And they're also subspecies for 5e, but yeah, 45.
yeah. Just you know, just in case you want a couple choices there. Uh, All right. A couple of these I'm not going to ask you about balance versus realism. Where do you fall on that spectrum?
Okay. So I like having a mix of things overall. Like people often try to split things up into whatever dimensions, balance versus realism, narrative versus simulation versus game, or whatever you want to do. It's always oversimplifying a very complex, multi-dimensional tapestry of things. I would say that in general, my belief is that you want to use that simulation slash realism the minimum amount that is necessary to make it so it doesn't feel off for your group and your players.
Mm,
And then
mm,
put all the rest into everything else. And unfortunately or fortunately, depending on your players, if you have quantum physicists or whatever, and they're like, well, this doesn't match the quantum physics, or like you have a chemist who was like, well, I've read that the Black Dragon's breath weapon is a sulfuric acid, and when if I was holding up a copper shield, then the way that would interact, like depending on who your group is, you might actually have to do things way more in depth than anyone reasonably would, because they're an expert and they will have their gears ground by something that most groups would just go right past and be like, this seems fine. So I would say you do it to the minimum amount where no one has their gears ground. Everyone feels like this doesn't like break my suspension of disbelief and I'm having fun. And then pour all the rest into narrative and gamism. So that's sort of, and to be clear, I play with a lot of people who have high bars for that. So there is a decent amount of simulation that we do, but I think that a lot of people also can get away with doing less, and it's usually to your advantage to do just enough and
mm.
then pour the rest into others.
That's a brilliant answer because like yeah, I mean one, I feel like you had that experience with the Copper Shield. Like I've been at that table. Like I've run games for those guys, and I love it when we're doing it, you know. But like if you go that deep with people who don't care, you're losing players. You know, you do want to find the right balance for your table. Um, and I think so. You kind of flirted with your maybe disregard or like questioning of like taxonomies in general. But like, what are you were talking in like GSR terms or whatever? But what is your rubric? What are the dimensions that you like think about or discuss things with? Do you have like a go-to style, or do you like see through the matrix and you realize that those are all just like estimations?
I would say halfway in between those, which is that anytime someone's trying to give you 2 or 3 or 4, it's just too far off. Instead, I like to think of things as a game designer as game designers look at the world through many different lenses, and they're not just two things like game balance versus realism. They're like maybe 100 different ways that you can look at things, and they're all interrelated, so they're not like completely independent axes with an XYZ. Even game mist, narrativist, and simulationists actually are interrelated enough that if you bring 10 people into the room, you'll have arguments about which particular decision is like, no, that decision that you're talking about making is done because of a narrative reason. And another person's like, that's not a narrative reason. It was actually for the game reason. And so Similarly, these are all interconnected. They're not independent, but there are like hundreds of different ways to look at things. For instance, um, when I was a sort of just game designing before I worked at Paizo, there were certain lenses that I was able to look at and look through very well. Ones that were related to the groups I ran for and played with. Organized play allowed me to do so for a whole bunch of different tables.
Mm.
Also, just like mathematical framework, things like that. But there were certain like player psychology perspectives that are not even related to any of the other things, but are more of just like, how does this look? How does this feel? That I was able to learn more easily at Paizo, where there's a lot of player feedback and you can get these big surveys. So, an example of that is imagine just for a moment that I created a feat that was called like Blade Scarf Dancer. And what it did was it gave you if you have a blade scarf that you just put on your blades, you get like in Pathfinder 2, uh +2 to all attack rolls with your blades, and you get an extra quickened every round to make an extra attack, and it's a low level feat.
Mm.
And also, while doing a performance dancing with scarves in the Kingdom of Roses, you get a +1 circumstance bonus on performance checks. Now, many players are actually might actually tell you this feat is weak, even though the first thing that I said is absolutely absurd and is way overpowered for Pathfinder 2. The reason is this, and it was something I had not expected. If we just left off that part at the end, everyone would be like, that's absurd. You shouldn't have even allowed it. But by putting the part at the end, which is strictly an improvement, even though it's obviously not much of an improvement, it's just a ribbon that you can barely ever use.
Literally a
It
ribbon.
actually, yes, I made it literally a ribbon. It literally tricks your mind into thinking that the feat is worse because most players don't have an inherent economic understanding of the currency of feat slots and what their value is. So just assume the value of this feat must be everything that is included in there is necessary to make it be worth its full amount. And so when you look and see that one of the things that's included in there seems like it's worthless,
Hmm.
you're like, well, then I need to lose that. This must be only 80% of a feat because that other 20% at the end I'm never going to use. It must be bad. I literally had a professional game designer one time where there was a thing that was one of the strongest feats in a class, and it had like a weird, like very unusual to come up um, clause at the end that was added to it. It was like, Mark, I kind of think this feat is weak, and especially this thing at the end isn't going to come up. So I took my hand over the printout and covered up the part at the end, and I was like, take a look at it now. They looked at it, it's like, this may be the strongest feat in the class. And it's actually very hard to convince ourselves about that because it's hard to, like, it's not like there's like a set framework where people understand the exact value of feat of a various level. So that is an example of one of the frames that you're not, that's not gamist narrativist or simulationist. That is pure player psychology. And so
Hmm.
my end result was that we took out that thing at the end, even though it was the one that was I'm discussing here with the other game designer, even though it was interesting and made the feat more flavorful and gave you a strict improvement because of it. Now that it's gone, it's gone. But it caused people who were looking at it to now think the feat is stronger, even though it is weaker.
So it's like psychologically we have this like where it's cumulative and it's like really good thing minus this bad thing instead of this bad thing. Like it's not all
Here's another
additional.
example that might help you more easily.
Yeah.
There was a magazine back in the day when fourth edition and Pathfinder were both like sort of coming out, like Kobold Quarterly, that just had a bunch of articles that were for like both games and sometimes other games. It was at a very reasonable price, even compared to other magazines. Even if you just played one of the two games, if you looked at it, you were getting value out of it. But a lot of people that I talked to were like, yeah, I don't want this because half of it is this system that I'm not playing.
Hmm.
And even if you say, well, yeah, but look, though, it's a good value for the ones you're getting. Even like look at Dragon Magazine or some other magazines or other things by page. and they would still say, okay, but half of it I'm not going to be able to use, or this percentage is just the thing I'm not going to be able to use. It just feels like I'm getting a bad value. And that's the same
Yeah.
psychological perspective where when you get something, when you pay for something, in this case with a feed slot, you want to be able to get good value out of all of it, not just sort of like throw some of it away. And that's what trips you up. It's a generally good psychological instinct in most cases, but it causes weird things to happen in game design. And that's just one of like 100 different small ways that you have to look at things that go beyond like the kind of classic dimension.
Yeah, because people are fundamentally different. As much as you can like cook it down and like, okay, I understand the psychological concept, precept. But yeah, the more people who are going to be interacting with the thing. That's why game masters like understand your players. There's 5 people sitting around the table. You can do it. You don't need to have a polling survey. You don't need a ton of data. You can figure out like some people at your table are looking for different things. So there's no one true way to do the thing because you have a varied audience. Even if
That's
you're
the
playing
true
by
secret.
yourself, like you get bored of
Yeah.
one style of play and you want some variety. Um,
That's the true secret. Sometimes I'll see people being like, well, I have my group and they have their way of playing, and I think I know what they're doing and what they want more than like this thing in the book, game designer. And the game designer's like, yes, you do.
yes. Yeah.
You're not a professional game designer, but that doesn't matter
Right.
because professional game designers are trying to put in a framework that more or less will work pretty well for everyone and that you can get to what you want from there on a baseline that works for most people. But you know your own group to a level that nobody else does, assuming that you took the time to get to know them or ask them. And so there's a very high probability that whatever tweaks you want to make that seem to work for your group actually do make the game better for your group. With like maybe a few rules, caveats of like, okay, but like don't mess with the action economy of the game that you're playing or certain like fundamental things unless you're very, very deeply into it. But for the most part, though, that's the case. Professional game design experience is great. It lets you look at things from all 100 different lenses. But you don't need professional game design experience to look at things through the lenses of Ryan's group. And you have that better than any game designer would.
Right. Which is, yeah. And I see that because I'll talk about like I'll walk through some like published adventures. Like you can do this or this or this. It's like we hate this because of this. It's like, all right, cool. You don't like that style. You don't like that tone. Uh Great, cool. Do it your way. And no one's gonna do it better than you. Even for yourself. I mean, there's a lot of like service-minded game mastery advice because maybe to counteract some other impulses. But if something you're doing is making you have more fun, that's increasing the total amount of fun at the table, and your players are probably having a better time if you're not miserable because you're trying to fit your play style into something you heard on YouTube or whatever else, what's written in the book somewhere. Um, Love that. Yeah, give me one more D20. I'm not. We should be done, but
Okay,
I
we're
want
gonna do it. We're
more.
gonna do it. One
I
more
want more
d20
answers.
after the lightning round. It is a 14.
14. Getting up there now.
We got 7 times 2 equals 14, or 7 plus 7.
Oh, okay. This is speaking of like false dichotomies and enforcing things into too specific of a spectrum. What is your take on the sandbox versus railroad spectrum?
All right. Well, weirdly enough, like the Roll for Combat Live that we were talking about earlier is also one where we kind of bring up sandbox versus railroad, and I maintain that it's sort of a two-dimensional, at least really in actuality, everything is multi-dimensional, and we're just kind of like crushing down all of these differences into just these tags. But because there's sandbox versus railroad, but there's also high detail versus low detail. And I talked
Hmm.
about that in that other episode. So you can have a high detail sandbox where it's this giant box and you open it up and it's got huge reams of information on every hex in this giant hex map. Or you can have a low detail sandbox where it's just like, here's the bullet points for things that are going to happen and make some magic. And you can have similarly a high detail or a low detail railroad as well. And for me, it kind of depends on my group. I'm fine as a GM going with what my group wants to play. And I kind of like things in the middle that are like sometimes sandboxy, sometimes they have some kind of more story elements. When I'm writing my own, they tend to be, I would say, a sandbox, but the thing about it is that I'm like the just as planned guy who everyone's like, how could that be just as planned? Because everyone was just acting chaotically and doing whatever they want. But like the chances of my players, even if they throw me some curveballs with how they do things, the chances
Mhm.
of them actually walking through even a convoluted series of steps towards where I think that they will go in a sandbox scenario is very high. So it's sort of a curated sandbox in the sense that I'm like, yeah, do whatever you want, but secretly there's a high probability without my meddling with it that they will just kind of walk into my spider web.
Yeah, because there's an understanding, especially if you know your player base, of like this is the thing that's going to be the shiniest in your eyes.
I
Uh,
know what they each like
yeah,
exactly. So I'll be
yeah,
like, this person's gonna do this, and then that person's gonna do that, and that person, I'm not sure, but it's one of these three things. And then that's what will happen like 90 some percent of the time with my group because I know them very well.
yes. And it's so harkening back to that episode with I think it was the one with Baron. You guys were talking Sandbox Railroad. You were talking about how I forget what this particular example was, but how it actually like narrows and widens, and how there
Yes.
it is a false like choice. Like this is a sandbox adventure. It's like, well, it is for like these three chapters, but like the beginning and the end happen this way, and that's that. And I think, yeah, I mean that's where my
100%.
personal preference lies of like ultimate player choice, big finales.
Narrow, wide, narrow, wide, narrow, wide is actually a
Yes.
very standard sort of middle of the road adventure building style. And I would maintain that even though people talk about Kingmaker as a sandbox, that is actually narrow, wide, narrow, because there are a lot of choke points that you have to go to in Kingmaker. And if you do something weird that would get around it, then the GM has to kind of work to figure things out. And we definitely did when Linda was running Kingmaker. Um, I will give no spoilers beyond the names of the volumes, which if you've even read the names of the volumes, there's Stolen Land, then there is, I always get mixed up whether River Run Red or Blood for Blood is 2 and 4. I think Rivers Run Red is 2 and 3 is Varnhold Vanishing. Okay? So there is a kind of a spoiler in the name of number 3 because it's called Varnhold Vanishing. But our group made it so that Varnhold did not vanishing. And that was not necessarily easy for Linda to deal with, but she did. And we had a completely different setup for that entire part of the AP. But normally, if you're running it without high amounts of tweaking, it's pretty narrow, wide, narrow. And even then, she
Mhm.
managed to get us to go into the dungeon we were supposed to go to. What we did is we blitzed it in advance before like it caused the problems, and that is how we
Hmm.
prevented things from going on. There's some assumptions in the adventure path that like the people around are fairly incompetent and like some list rando wanders in and does some bad stuff, whereas the party had set up defenses and Linda was like, there's no way some rando is going to be able to do this. So she tweaked it around, and then we just kind of did the narrow things, but on our own sort of motivation. We were like, yeah, we're going here on purpose to stop these things from happening before they can start.
Yeah, and that's brilliant. That's perfect because that is, I mean, assuming you're not doing a ton of preparation from scratch before every session and like running like a pure theoretical sandbox just based on the players' decisions from last week, because maybe you don't have the time or the capacity to do that on a weekly basis. Yeah, there's no such thing as a pure sandbox or a pure railroad because the players are going to make decisions that the book couldn't account for, because I don't care how many pages you got,
Yeah.
you're the game designer, the publisher can't know all the decisions that the players are going to make.
Even
It's
if you're
just,
playing organized play,
yeah.
where usually it's very curated because it has this time slot, you
Mm-hmm.
can run into some stumpers. For
Yes.
instance, I'm gonna give Linda again as the GM, maybe because I don't know, I get up to more trouble as a player, although I was just the archer. I didn't do this one.
The likely
Um,
story. All
in
right.
this one, our cleric and wizard after we received a mission that was just like, there are these ruins, and this is part 2 of having gone here. So, Pathfinder Society has been here before. They're a group of archaeologists in the world, and we have sent down our scholars, including this one lady that you've already met, and we have the journal from her and stuff. And she hasn't reported back. We think like bad things have broken into this area that we've been to before and have been working in. So we need you to like go down there, even though Hell Knights are in control of the surface elevator, and like convince them to let you go down and like get in there and figure out what happened to our scholar. And so the cleric and wizard like kind of looked into like, so we have like a journal and stuff from her. We met her. We know what she looks like. We've been to this area. We know what the area looks like. We know exactly where it is. And Linda's like, yeah. The guy who gave the mission is like, yeah. And they're like, okay, we're gonna scry on her.
Mm.
And even though scrying and teleporting in Pathfinder 1, which this was run in, have some strict limitations where you can't just scry and then hope that you can get there. You have to know exactly where it is and have a very strong understanding of the layout of the location, which we had. So scryed on her, figured out where she was in the complex, and teleported. And Linda is like, let's take a 15-minute break. When we came back, then even though it was a very railroaded adventure with very specific things and like an encounter where 32, some huge number of really crappy monsters attacks you on the elevator going down and can't do anything, and like very specific order, she's like, all right, yeah, you teleport right to her and all the other hostages. This is normally the end, because as you get here, you're attacked by the big bad. And the big bad attacked us. We beat it, and they're like, thank you for saving us from that thing. But yeah, there's monsters everywhere. We have to get out. And then it became an escort mission. It was actually harder.
Yeah.
Because we had not cleared out anything. And that group of 32 crappy monsters who couldn't have hit anybody in the party except on a natural 20 was now incredibly dangerous, because we had these non-combatant scholars that we were bringing up the elevator with us. And we couldn't just throw a fireball to kill all of them and singe our party a little. It would have killed all of our scholars too. So it actually was much more fun doing it backwards in completely the opposite order.
Yeah, I love stuff like that. Yeah, I'm a big fan of running the same, especially like a one shot, right? Like a campaign if you can get it. But like I like running the same scenario for multiple groups and just seeing how different it can be. Because yeah, that's the beauty of all of this, at least half the time. All right, so speaking of scholar, we're gonna cook up a teacher next. But first, what's coming up for Battle Zoo or Arcane, Mark? What's on deck?
So in terms of Battle Zoo, every month this year, we're putting out another one of the ancestries for the Year of Legends. And so at the time of recording, Golemborn is the next one. For that, we also have a Kickstarter that's going to come up like probably end of August, beginning of September, for Battle Zoo Bestiary Elemental Storm. Is going to be the award winners from our RPG Superstar contest. 150 plus monsters from 20 different elements, plus the ability to use those elements to infuse into your weapons with monster part crafting, a monster hunter archetype for like sort of action RPG style hijinks, like where you climb onto the back of the monster, or even try to like, as it attacks you on its back, you dodge out of the way so it like hits itself, or other things like that. And some new spells that match some of the 20 elements that are in there to help fill out the spell list of some of those monsters. And also, if you're playing a monster mage from our Battle Zoo Bestiary, you can take the spells from the monsters you defeat. It's kind of like a blue mage kind of situation.
Awesome. Yeah, looking forward to getting my hands on that. That sounds dope. I want it. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. Thank you at home for watching, or I assume you're at home. Maybe you're at the gym. I don't know. Appreciate you. Check out Mark next time when we roll on the Game Masters Compendium of Explosive Creation. Thanks, everybody. Bye.